Good day and thank you for joining CivilNet. Today our guest at the studios is Asbed Kotchikian. He's a senior lecturer of international relations and political science at Bentley University. Thank you for being here today.
Nice being here again.
I know that you're just back from a trip to Beirut and Lebanon. Could you just tell us more about the overview, the situation?
Before going on about the specific situation in Lebanon, in the last year and a half, I've been traveling in the region. I've been to Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon a couple of times, in Lebanon mostly a couple of times. And the goal of the research was to look into a couple of fronts. One was research on religious minorities in the region, in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. But also I managed to get a tangential, sort of a tangent off of it and look into the refugee crisis there. The most recent trip in Lebanon was aimed at visiting Syria as well as part of my research to again examine how do the Christian religious minorities rather see their future in the region. Specifically about Lebanon, I always view Lebanon as a place where if the countries around Lebanon are comfortable and there's no war, everyone fights their war in Lebanon, but then when the other countries fight with each other directly, then Lebanon is left alone. In the words of one comedian, American Iranian comedian, he says that, there's something wrong in the Middle East when Lebanon is the most stable country in the region. So it's a very weird example of a failed state that is still going on for some odd reason that no one can explain.
And from what you saw, what are the prospects of religious minorities, including the Armenian communities in the Middle East, given the political situation now?
Well, I can give you the short answer, but that would end the interview. But I think, the short answer is that there are none. To be realistic, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I see, compared to what the religious minorities were like, or the life of religious minorities in the region, in the Levant, let's say, has been more dynamic, and it was producing in the last 10-15 years a lot of material, be that culture, written literature, and so on. And I'm not just talking about the Armenian. But since the war in Iraq, that started the whole avalanche, that started the domino effect, where it has been, minorities have been leaving the country in droves. Mostly, whoever would stay, they stay out of necessity, or they can't leave. That's one thing. And there's also perhaps a misguided notion that they have to stay, minorities have to stay. I'm more familiar with this phenomenon among the Armenians, that this is the beating heart of the Armenian diaspora, that we shouldn't leave and so on, which I think is nonsense, to say the least.
But there have been conflicting ideas because, the Armenian state was saying come to Armenia. Meanwhile, the church was saying no, we have to stay put and not leave because by leaving we're destroying the community.
Well, see, that's the problem. Even whoever's advocating for the Armenians to come to Armenia, or whoever's advocating for them to stay there, it's just a lip service. There is no reasonable, or there is no substantial plan. Okay, so you come here into Armenia, what do you do? How do you come here? If you're going to stay there, how the hell are you going to stay there? Under such difficult conditions. I think it has become more rhetoric, and it is being used one way or another by different groups, by different institutions, be those secular or non-religious institutions or religious institutions. This is one of the biggest challenges of mindset that exists among the Armenian diaspora, within the Armenian diaspora, but also in Armenia. Not understanding the multi-nuances that exist within the diaspora in Armenia. Diaspora is one blanket definition, that's it. You're a diaspora and that's it. Whereas on the side of the Armenians, or on the side of the diaspora, there is a mental block for the most part towards Armenia, culturally, especially if you're coming from a Middle Eastern background. So there is something not how should I put it, not right here. It's a different culture rather after a while, but at the same time, there is that sense of staying somewhere because you're comfortable. You don't want to leave. You don't want to take initial action. You don't want to preempt before things go bad. This is the same. You look at history, it's been repeated. You look at Egypt, for instance, in the 1940s, 50s. Huge Armenian community existed there, and it was the beating heart of the community, or of the diaspora at the time, along with Lebanon to a lesser extent, and Syria, mostly Syria and Lebanon. But then in 56, there was a nationalist revolution, and then suddenly people didn't know what they're going to do. So the problem is not about just thinking about maintaining the community, but also thinking about alternative plans as to what could happen, or what action can be taken if plan A or scenario A, B, or C happens. And even now, after 4 years of fighting, 5 years of fighting in the Middle East, in Syria, there are no clear plans as to, long-term plans as to how to handle the survival of the community members, not the community. I think these are the two separate things. You want to maintain the community, you want to have the survival of the community, then you force people to stay. For what? That's another issue. But then if you want to maintain the survival of the members, individuals, then you need to have a plan. There have been random acts in that sense of bringing people here. Some of them, most of them, came in on their own with their own accord and finding jobs, having difficulty to adjust, getting lost as to what to do, where to go. So this has been the major challenge. And frankly, I think other than once in a while when people would, something monumental will happen and they will think and pay attention about the situation in the Middle East or the communities in the Middle East. Other than that, it's just an everyday business. I mean, I'm sure you remember a couple of years ago when Kesap was attacked and so on. Suddenly people started talking about Kesap. And then what? There is complete oblivion, completely oblivious about the situation. So that's the situation.
So a lot of people from Aleppo or Syria in general, I'm talking about the Armenian community, moved to Lebanon. Does this mean that the Lebanese Armenian community got fresh, got reinvigorated in a way, fresh injection of people?
Well, depends. Look, the thing is that the injection concept works when you're talking about a community in Western communities, Western diaspora, let's put it, in the United States or France or Europe, where people coming from the Middle East, that would bring the new injection in terms of they speak Armenian, they teach Armenian, most of the school teachers would be in Armenian. But Lebanon and Syria have been the same, have more or less the same sort of structure. So I don't think there has been injection of fresh blood, let's put it, no pun intended, but there has been fresh air in terms of that. Most of the Syrian Armenians who came to Lebanon, it was familiar to them, the environment, more or less Arab environment. So that's why they felt more comfortable. But also considering how more expensive Lebanon is compared to Syria, most of the communities actually, when I was interviewing them, a lot of people, Syrians who moved to Lebanon, a couple of months later, they just went back to Syria. I mean, according to them, according to some, interviews, they were saying, here we're dying by humiliation every day. We'd rather go back to our home and die once under, one time if, we get hit by a bomb or so. It's a very confusing, and Syrian community, the Syrian Armenian community is really cannot be compared with the Lebanon one. The Syrian Armenian community has a longer, much longer history, but also more attachment to the land. I mean,
and to the state, from what I understand, they had a lot of belief in the states that would...
Absolutely. I mean, in the last 30 years, 40 years, before 40, 50 years, Syria actually even went to the Guinness Book of Records as one of the countries that had the most frequent coups. But then when they had stability since 1970, 1971, the country, the community flourished. They thrived. So they ended up having a belief in the system. They were treated well. After all, the country was governed by minorities, so they were a minority, so they benefited from that. And unlike, for instance, in Lebanon, even before the war or whenever there is no war, when it's also a Lebanese mentality that you're always on the move. You're not attached to the land, and the Lebanese Armenians also have that. But the Syrian Armenian has been attached, so for them, it's very much of a changing the psychological mindset that we need to leave now. According to at least my estimates, in Aleppo now, there aren't more than 6, at best 7,000 people. This is a community that used to be, 10 times that. So where are they? Some of them are here, some of them in Lebanon, some of them are in limbo. But most of them still now, it's that critical point where if the war ends, most of these would return. This is the critical point because another couple of years and then they would get acclimated wherever they are. Even get acclimated, get used to the limbo situation, and they might not go back. So I think, again, the problem is not about the survival of the community. That has been the wrong approach, rather about the survival of the community members, the individuals. And this has been, some people would say this is the larger picture, we're looking at the long-term project and so on, but you cannot gamble with people's lives. And I think this has created a major disenchantment within the community at large. I'm not talking about specific individuals, but larger context about their trust about the leadership, the church, be that the church or the different political organizations. And that is something, a trust that is very difficult to bring back.
Provided that the Syrian Armenian community survives, some return, some stay, and depending on the outcome, what could be the possible future of the Syrian Armenian community in Syria?
It is very difficult to make predictions because of the human factor. The human factor is so unpredictable that you cannot draw a parallel or a path. The best example that we can think of is of a previous experience is what happened in Lebanon when during the war a lot of people left, then they came back once the war was over. I'm not sure in Syria, I mean, there's that connection, as I said, there's that critical point where in the next couple of years, if the war ends in the next couple of years, which I doubt will end that soon, people will go back and probably it will witness a revival. Unfortunately, one of the good side effects of war is that after the war there's a lot of work, a lot of construction. People need to reconstruct everything. So it might witness a lot of revival, a lot of financial jobs and so on. And I think when it comes to the Syrian Armenian community, it's one of the wealthiest, not only just financially, but culturally and organizationally and integration-wise into the rest of the community. This also includes one of the other factors that after years of fighting in Syria, the radicalization of groups, where your Sunni neighbors or your Muslim neighbors would view, how are they going to view you? It's not suddenly the war is over, everyone will hug and hug it out and that's it. There will be a lot of mistrust. There will be a lot of fears from each other, a lot of carefully treading with each other. So I think there will be slow revival. If it gets to that point, there will be slow revival. But the point is, when would it end? When would it happen?
You were saying you were interviewing Syrian Armenians during your last trip. What were general findings of your interviews?
Well, that's one of the major issues. When I started the research, my research trip, it was actually, I was looking at how ISIS and the Kurdistan are small states that can function independently. And I was looking at ISIS as a state. But then my interest went to refugees, Iraqi and Syrian refugees in Iraq. And then it went to the minorities, including Yazidis, Assyrians, and Armenians. In Iraq, let's start from Iraq quickly. I mean, one of the let's say, findings or sense that I got was that there is a sense of abandonment by the people there, from the rest of the Armenian community, that they have forgotten about us, we don't exist, out of sight, out of mind. I have seen a similar sort of sentiments among the Syrian Armenians. Be that in Armenia, be that in Lebanon, or be that in Syria. That no one, yes, they are thinking about us, but only limited. It's not that they are expecting that there should be mobilization, a vast mobilization to help them and so on, and they're not seeing that. There's a lot of resentment about aid. I mean, they would say, well, in our name, they're raising a lot of money, we're not receiving that. I cannot substantiate if that's true or not. But this is what they're talking about. A lot of sense of being lost and without leadership. That they should have told us before. They should have let us leave before. One interview that I had with an educator in Syria, in Aleppo actually, and I was talking with him, and he said, I said, what should the leadership have done? And he said, basically, they should have asked us to leave, or they should have helped us to leave, to escape. There's that resentment where they said, well, wait, we'll see what's going to happen. Wait, we'll see what's going to happen. And it went from bad to worse. There's that resentment. And most of them are in the process of finding stability. And of course, the easiest or the most guaranteed or the most stable or the most comfortable place would be the West, especially Canada. So everyone is concerned how to get to Canada, how to get to the West. Should we get Armenian citizenship? Would it be easier? Should we stay on Syrian passport? I mean, this is the anachronistic thing that a lot of Syrian Armenians who went to Lebanon over the years before the war, they got Lebanese citizenship because that was considered to be easier and more useful. But now they're reinstating their Syrian citizenship because with a Syrian citizenship you can go, you can migrate. A lot of Lebanese actually are trying to go back and get the Syrian citizenship as well. So in a way, I think it's perhaps the best image that comes to my mind is a herd which is lost. You know, everyone is going in different ways, whatever they can find. With the difference is that in a herd, the sheep don't know where to go. But here, people, the survival instinct is about their kids, about their children, how to survive, how to make the best out of it. So it's quite I think, pessimistic or probably, yes, pessimistic perspective about the future, about the present, and more often than not, disenchantment with let's call it this leadership, community leadership.
And are there a lot of people who are just waiting to go back? Because with such communities, you either start working, start reestablishing yourself wherever you are, or you just wait to return. Is the factor of waiting to return a dominant factor?
That's an interesting point. To think out loud, I think most of the people that I've talked with here, they would like to go back, but they have to survive at the same time. Now, again, it comes back to that balance. If you start working now and you're making a living, it comes down to personal choice. Would you go back if you have left something behind? That's the thing. I mean, there are a lot of machinists I know, people. Let's put it this way. If you're a taxi driver here, it wouldn't make much of a difference if you're here or there. You would definitely go back. But if you're a machinist, you came here, opened a store, a shop, you're working, you would be less inclined to go back. If you have kids or not, if your kids are already integrated into the process, school, university, and so on, you would be less inclined to go. If it's only, a couple without any kids and so on, they would be more inclined to go back. So there is no one size fits all kind of a situation. Rather, it's very much, clusters of different people or clusters of different typologies.
My own impression of the Syrian Armenian community here or in Lebanon is that a lot of them had a lot of real estate. Mm-hmm. And that is something that's primarily drawing them back to either sell it or take care of it. Mm-hmm. That is exactly what's keeping them rooted in Syria. Mm-hmm. If they had less of that, they would be more free or
absolutely, that's
less ready to return.
Very good observation. And when it comes to, as I said earlier, that Syrian Armenian community has been in a stable situation for the last 45 years, so they've invested a lot in real estate. They own their houses. It's not like they live on rent in rental apartments and so on. So
a lot of the businesses,
they own, exactly, a lot of lands. Recently, when I was in Damascus, I was talking with the community there, and they told me that just outside of the outskirts of Damascus, they built a huge complex where they were going to bring all the community members, the school, and so on. The war happened, it's gone. So how would you still attach any hope of getting it back? Maybe the land, yes, but a lot of people actually, at least some of them that I've talked with, they're actually selling their apartments or their real estate pennies for the dollar. It could cost $1 million, whatever property, they would sell it for $100,000. These are the people who have lost hope. Others would just say, screw it, I'm not gonna worry about it. But I've also seen people who have, and it's not an attachment to how should I put it? It's not attachment to a material thing, but they're always concerned about, what will happen to my place? I was sitting the other day with a group of Syrian Armenians, and suddenly the phone rang and someone said, there was a bomb. We were hit by a bomb in this neighborhood. And everyone started analyzing, how far is it from our place? How is the situation? How are the store that I have there and so on? They're still living that, and not as a personal or non-material gain, but it's an attachment. It's a place where people have worked, have raised their families, so there's a nostalgic element as well. But I think it doesn't we shouldn't underestimate what you mentioned, that having real estate really keeps that connection. It doesn't cut the umbilical cord, let's put it this way.
And your research, is it going to be concluded with recommendations, or it's just an observation research? Because if you have recommendations, I would want to ask you about that.
Yeah, well, observations, everyone can make observations. As a social scientist, it's our job to make not recommendations per se, but offer perspectives. At this point, I myself haven't reached any conclusions or any recommendations. I mean, it's more about the initial stage. But some of the things I can imagine or moving in that direction is the role of perhaps the reimagination or the reevaluation of the role of diaspora institutions and also Armenia's institutions. Look, Armenia is a country, it has its priorities, it has its citizens to take care of. I think it's a very wrong idea to say that Armenian government has a plan for Syrian Armenians, whereas they can neglect their own citizens. Why find jobs for Syrian Armenians where your own citizens are not, do not have jobs? So that's one of the other things, to be able to look at the situation from a global and comprehensive perspective. Now, anything would come out of that? I don't think so. But it's a recommendation as to, it's re-strategizing, re-evaluating not as an institution, but also re-evaluating who are you as a diaspora. Again, that age-old sort of repeated mantra, the diaspora is important, the diaspora is the beating heart, blah, 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 or Lebanon or Syria are the beating heart of the diaspora. I think that is an old mantra that I need to get rid of, to really look into Armenia as an entity, even with its problems, as a place where you can actually gradually integrate, gradually sort of bring people. As much as there are people who criticize Armenia and Lebanon, like Syrian Armenians or diasporans, there are still a lot who have integrated into the community with the language problems, with the cultural differences, but they're more or less integrated and they're working.
And I suppose if we're practical, Armenia still, with all its problems, has less problems than Lebanon or Syria or any other Middle Eastern.
See, that's the nearsightedness. You've had Armenia, which the last 25 years has a record of more or less stability. Yes, there has been war, recent escalation of war as well, but Armenia has been stable. Yes, jobs, lack of jobs, little jobs, some cases, poverty, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Where you have it everywhere. I mean, you have it even in Lebanon and Syria, you have it. But that mental block that people have, oh, that's Armenia, that's not, they're different, they speak different from us, they have a different perspective on things, or they do this or that. It's more of a problem. I think it's a challenge, and I think it's a fault of the leadership, that community leadership, that didn't change that. In the last 20 years, you could have easily said, yes, there were people who came in, they got screwed financially, they got, there were cases of, being taken advantage of and so on, but there are also cases where people came in and made money, or they invested or became productive. You're a musician, journalist, and so on, and you benefited from it.
Yeah, so we had enough time to do this work to change the mentality overall, the relationship of diaspora towards Armenia and Armenia towards diaspora.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I've noticed is that, unlike what happened in the last 15 years, in the last 5 years, suddenly the diaspora, or Armenian perspective in Armenia towards the diaspora, and especially because of the Syrian Armenians, changed significantly. In the past, you didn't have.
It's very evident, yes.
Yeah, because suddenly you had a whole sort of rush of people. In the past, it was a constant small stream of people coming in, but now you suddenly had a large influx that made a change, which is, I think it's a very interesting analogy to see what happened now compared to what happened in 1946 with the repatriation or the return or coming to Armenia of diasporans. So a lot of fingers, a lot of people to blame, or a lot of people to point fingers at. But I think the diaspora has been late in reevaluating itself. Armenia has been negligent towards thinking strategically about this, situating the diaspora within the larger context of Armenia. Again, I disagree that the diaspora Armenians, because there are difficulties, but they shouldn't be separate from any of the processes in Armenia. You want to find jobs for Syrian Armenians, make sure that it is within the larger context of finding jobs for your own citizens. So that is the major challenge, and it is changing, but it's too little, I think, too slow, too late.
Well, I think what happened in the last couple of years is that Armenia, for the first time, got a chance to evaluate diaspora as a community, not as individuals, as has been the case before. So that's a positive outcome, and
It is.
reluctant outcome, I suppose.
Absolutely. But also you have to realize that the diaspora is not just Syrian Armenians. You know, the diaspora, there are other elements. Although, again, in the West, there is less interest in the United States. For instance, the Armenian communities are less interested in moving here. You have individual cases, and it's usually considered to be like a cow that gives milk. You know, but again, I think there's more money generated in Armenia than it is in terms of the diaspora providing assistance. Again, there is no empirical evidence. I don't have any empirical evidence, but that's my sense. If you look at the recent fundraisers and so on, there are more donations coming from Armenia than you have from diaspora. So that also raises the question, how relevant is the diaspora in Armenia's life? A question that I think my answer would be relatively unrelevant. But again, there is a need to remain relevant that drives the diaspora.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for this conversation, and we thank the viewers for joining us.